ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. Today we are having this webinar on a very, very important subject, that is the future of peace in Afghanistan. As we are aware that the negotiations between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban are stalled, to say the very least. To the contrary, the on-ground situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating really, really fast, with fighting taking place in and around two important cities of Afghanistan as we speak, that is the cities of Kandahar and Herat. As the security situation in Afghanistan deteriorates, we are likely to see an upsurge in the influx of refugees from Afghanistan to the neighboring countries, which is a source of grave concern for Pakistan. And that is why our National Security Advisor has mentioned in one of his briefings to the press in the US that Pakistan would ideally want to have some no conflict zones within Afghanistan where all those displaced people could be given shelter. And besides that, there is other bad news emanating from Afghanistan. There was a news report this morning in Dawn that the Afghan leadership move that Pakistan was supposed to hold has also been postponed. So all these developments make the situation in Afghanistan very, very uncertain. And that is why we have convened this webinar today. And we have two eminent distinguished speakers. That is author and senior journalist IMTIAZ and Professor NAHEED GORAYA with us to speak today on these questions and these uncertainties about Afghanistan. But before I invite our honorable panelists to speak on the subject, I would invite President Institute of Regional Studies, Ambassador Nadeem Diaz, to kindly give his welcome remarks. Over to you, President IRS. Sir, you need to unmute yourself.
My apologies, thank you, Arish. My apologies for not unmuting myself. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and I really look forward to listening to two experts on Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is, it's complicated. We all know the situation, the way it is evolving over there, and I don't think there are any two opinions that whatever happens in Afghanistan will have a direct impact on us as well as on the region. So I think everybody in the region, including countries which are even far away, they are monitoring the situation fairly closely. Today's event, I think, is very important because it is the first one with our collaborative partner, which is the University of the Punjab. So I really look forward to further engagement with the Center of South Asia Studies at the Punjab University. Arish has very aptly laid out some of the key issues which are there, and I would like to add a few to them. That what if there is instability in Afghanistan, like how would the situation in Afghanistan fare with that? Like, the prescribed organizations, what would they do, and what are the options which are available with the government to ensure that the happenings in Afghanistan do not really impact so severely on us. So with these brief comments, I would like to hear the two panelists, and I would like to again thank them for being present with us today. Thank you very much. Over to you, Arish. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With these introductory remarks, I would now like to introduce our first speaker of the session. Our first speaker of the session is Mr. IMTIAZ, who is a senior journalist and an author. He is the executive director of the Islamabad-based Center for Research and Security Studies that he founded in December 2007. The center is a research and advocacy outfit focused primarily on security, radicalization, and governance. He has been regularly contributing to international and national print media such as Foreign Policy, the Wall Street Journal, the Friday Times, and Daily Express Tribune on issues such as militancy, border regions, Afghanistan, and Indo-Pak relations. Besides offering advice as a consultant to foreign diplomatic missions and development sector organizations, Mr. Imtiaz Gul regularly appears as an expert on Pakistani TV channels as well as Doha-based Al Jazeera for his expertise in areas such as Afghanistan, tribal areas, and the freedom struggle in Kashmir. Mr. Gul has presented papers and given talks at universities and international security and counter-terror conferences in various important cities across the globe. He is the author of 4 books on subjects related to Afghanistan and terrorism. Besides reporting for the Urdu, English, and Hindi language service of Deutsche Welle, Germany's foreign languages broadcaster, between 1989 and 2009, Imtiaz Gul has also been broadcasting with the CNN between 1998 and 2000, and with the Hong Kong-based Star World TV, Japanese National Broadcasting Corporation (NHK), and the National Public Radio in the United States. Mr. Gul is fluent in English, German, Pashto, Urdu, Punjabi, and Dari. With this introduction, I pass over the mic to you, Gul Sahab. I think there is some connection issue.
We can't hear anyone.
Yes, he has a connection.
We'll wait for him for some time. Ahmad, has he gotten disconnected?
No, he is here, but he is facing some connection issue. Let me try. He's about to rejoin us.
Okay. Ahmad, any update?
He is trying to join us.
So what's the hold up?
He's facing internet connection at their end. So
Arish,
can
may I
we move to
recommend
next?
that maybe we can request our
Second
honorable
panel.
next speaker, Madam NAHEED, to go ahead. Like this, we will still have a lot of time.
Okay. So since Dr. NAHEED GORAYA is already here without any connection issues, so we'll have her speak first. Dr. NAHEED GORAYA is Associate Professor at the Center for South Asian Studies in the University of Punjab. She has done her postdoctorate from the Department of Political Science, University of Gothenburg, Sweden. Her postdoctoral research was published as a book titled NATO Drawdown from Afghanistan, Political Implications for Federally Administered Tribal Areas of Pakistan. It was published in Sweden. Her research interests are security studies, terrorism, and governance issues in South Asia. She has published 27 research articles, published in various research journals of international repute, and 6 books. 6 books on different contemporary security and political issues. With that introduction, I kind of have a message in the chat. Okay, so IMTIAZ Gul Saab has also joined. So I think we'll have Sir IMTIAZ Gul Saab first, and then we'll proceed with
you can actually go ahead. I think because somehow some malign influence has disrupted our Wi-Fi office.
Perhaps that's what the battle.
I was going to talk about the malign influence of neighbors. So here, some neighbor has basically exercised as influence. So I would wait for the connection to stabilize. So,
Okay.
And meanwhile, I think we can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So over to you, Dr. Goraya.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to discuss the future prospects of Afghan peace process in this webinar organized by Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad. I am really thankful. And to start with, I will say that dear friends, colleagues, and those who I have never met, I believe that peace can only be achieved through the understanding, because it's not something that we believe that it is absence of war, as it is something close to harmony. It is about the accord. Because people will ultimately settle down for peace at almost at any price. Because we as humanity, I would say, we all have a shared future and no one is immune to common threat. So talking in this context, today I will talk about the future of Afghanistan peace prospect, which I believe that as per latest information which we have been seeing, this Doha negotiations and talks, if they become successful, of course we would be happy, as Pakistani government is trying to be a facilitator, and it is playing a very major positive role in this peace process. So it will be, of course, a matter of happiness, but at the same time, I would say that I will be astonished, because there doesn't seem to be any signals that there would be any success in near future. And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, we all know that it's known as the heart of Asia, but at the same time, it is a place where the major powers have played the non-cooperative games, and that also very repeatedly. So according to my view, that was also a kind of conclusion and theme of my postdoc research, which was published from Sweden, that I always talk that future of Afghanistan, that it oscillates between 3 things. That is, one is hope. Hope is that if right and acute choices are made, then it can engender the good governance and resulting in the regional peace, and eventually at the end of the day we will have a global peace. And then the second is it oscillates between the thing feel is about the uncertainty, what will happen, and then comes the fear is that if any imbalance may occur, it will confront the peace process. Then comes, what are the challenges? Of course, it's a long history of war-torn Afghanistan. It's not a matter of one day that today Doha negotiations will take place and Taliban and Ashraf Ghani government will talk, and tomorrow we will have some result. It's a long process. It's a time testing. I think it's a nerve testing and time consuming factor, both at the political front, at the regional front, because it will require the political will of both parties. Ultimately, it is the Afghan people who Taliban and Ashraf Ghani government, Afghans, they have to decide. Pakistan can be a facilitator, but it cannot impose. United States could be with the sincere interest, but it cannot impose. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is the Afghan who is going to decide. And then it needs a political commitment, of course. We need political will and smooth flow of finances, and also the multi-stakeholder approaches for the better coordination and cooperation. Because everybody, I will not go in the detail that how country needs this reconstruction, reintegration, reconciliation, and rehabilitation, of course. So whenever I talk about the future of Afghan peace process, I always think about few research questions that should be assessed and re-evaluated while analyzing the future of Afghan peace process. Because first thing that comes to my mind, that in the face of any failure, though America is withdrawing from Afghanistan because it has lost a war, it is going with a moral burden, I would say. For after 21 years of war, it has achieved nothing except the loss of people, except the loss of $1 trillion of money, and of course people who are there. Though I would say that the did not even have the life-threatening injuries, but they have the psychological problems. So going to or emerge becomes successful. Situation about the liberties, especially the citizenship rights, women rights, and the freedom, would they be safeguarded or lost, particularly at a point of concern for those for those Afghans who have born and grown up in the post 9/11 era. And of course, the women also, I always talk, whose lives were changed when Taliban came and whose lives changed when Taliban left. So are there any chances which may compel Washington to divert its withdrawal strategy? So the future of Afghanistan in the offing of peace process reminds the very fact that the protracted and violent conflict zones, they lead to hostile environment even after they are resolved. Because I believe the conflicts otherwise have undying, rather maybe we can say the slow dying energy at times, and they can re-emerge out of those ashes and sometimes out of the same conflict or resolution. So Afghan peace process and withdrawal of foreign troops, that is undoubtedly interconnected with the reconciliation process between the Afghan factions. And of course, it is indispensable as well, not only for the regional peace, national, local, but also for the global peace. And since any option for Washington also for the U-turn policy is not foreseeable, except that a war break out at a larger level there, or an international terrorist group may emerge, which becomes a danger for the regional stability, and including Pakistan, of course. And if left in mess, the future scenario could be, which everybody is talking, we hear this news and every discussion, that there could be a civil war, new power blocks, sectarian conflicts, and refugees influx of course, and again our burden of refugees for Pakistan. But on the optimistic front, I would say it may be anticipated that okay, let's see that the peaceful peace agreement may take place between Afghan government and Taliban, and it may be concluded, and the situation turns out to be very favorable for everyone. But even then, we cannot rule out the fact that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be very much difficult for Afghanistan, because there are short-term, long-term problems, and specifically, I would say, particularly the impact of COVID-19 and unemployment among youth, rampant corruption, economic crisis, and so on and on. And in the worst scenario, if the superpower leaves everything in mess, then the regional powers will be there, and because then again there will be a proxy war, which I always believe that the neighbors should not re-involve themselves in a new proxy war in Afghanistan. So because when we see last 20-21 years efforts to resolve Afghanistan problem by force, it has clearly demonstrated that its effectiveness and it has made dialogue and cooperation the last resort. So coming back to the Pakistan, I believe, and that it has played a major positive contribution in Afghan peace process. और जो positive I would say आपकी efforts होती हैं वो हमेशा नतीजा खेज भी होती हैं in a positive direction. And the important thing is that America still to date is looking at Pakistan through the prism of Afghanistan. And that should not be the strategy, because Pakistan is a significant country. It has its own importance, and specifically to the Afghan scenario when we talk. और अगर आप अमेरिका के तनाजुर से देखें तो we see that it has spent trillion of dollars there. यानी उनके 3-4 हज़ार बंदे मारे गए हैं, फौजी मारे गए हैं, और उनको वहाँ पे जो again which I have talked earlier that they have psychological pressure as well. तो उनकी अपनी जिंदगी पर भी बहुत मनफी असर पड़ा है. और आफ्टर 20 years भी अगर आप एक हारी हुई जंग लेकर जा रहे हैं एक मॉरल बर्डन के साथ, तो अगला मरला इट कुड बी कि आपने इस शिकस्त का मलबा एक्चुअली किस पे डालना है. और अगर अमेरिका चाहता है कि इट वांट्स टू हैव अ लेवरेज, इट वांट्स टू हैव पीस इन अफगानिस्तान, लेकिन इवन देन इट कैन नॉट इम्पोज. और अगर मकसद लेट्स से ये है कि हमने तालिबान को आने ही नहीं देना, तो इवन देन इट इज देयर इशू. और पाकिस्तान का भी ये काम नहीं, which Prime Minister also has said at so many occasions that Pakistan would be playing a role of a facilitator, not a guarantor, and it's going to be the part of the solution and not to be the part of problem, because Pakistan जो है, पाकिस्तान ने दहशतगर्दी की जंग में सबसे ज्यादा सफर किया है. और पाकिस्तान आई वुड से इन अ सेंस अ यूनिक कंट्री जिसने ऑपरेशनली, टेक्निकली और आइडियोलॉजिकली दहशतगर्दी के नैरेटिव को डिफीट किया है और अपना सिक्योरिटी बहुत बेहतर किया है इस दौरान. तो इसलिए अगर अमेरिका भी ये कोशिश करेगा कि फलां को लाना है, फलां को नहीं लाना, तो वहां पे अल्टीमेटली एट द एंड ऑफ द डे सिविल वार ही होगी, जिसका फायदा अमेरिका को तो नहीं होगा, लेकिन उसका नुकसान पाकिस्तान को भी होगा और बहुत ज्यादा नुकसान होगा. और दूसरी बात ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि तालिबान जो हैं वो पाकिस्तान उनको इन दैट सेंस शायद इन्फ्लुएंस नहीं कर सकता, क्योंकि तालिबान एक चीज जो भी मैं समझती हूँ पढ़ा लिखा तबका है, एकेडमिशियन है या रिसर्चर हैं, दे नो इट वेरी वेल कि तालिबान पाकिस्तान के गुलाम नहीं है. अब तो वो और भी आजाद हो गए, उनके दूसरे ममालिक के साथ कनेक्शंस हैं. इवन इन कनेक्शंस की वजह से टुडे दे आर ऑन द नेगोशिएशन टेबल्स विद डायरेक्ट नेगोशिएशन विद अमेरिका. पाकिस्तान नहीं बनेगा. जो भी करंट सिचुएशन है, जो मसला हल करना है, उसमें अफगानों को अपना मसला हल करना है. ये बैलेंस ऑफ पावर कायम करना अफगानों की जिम्मेदारी है. ये इट इज अ टेस्ट फॉर तालिबान, इट्स अ टेस्ट फॉर काबिल गवर्नमेंट, क्योंकि उनका ये हक है कि वो अफगानों को एक दूसरे को जिंदा रहने का हक दें. और तालिबान राइट फ्रॉम द बिगनिंग ये भी कहते रहे कि जब फौजी गैर मुल्की फौजों का यहाँ से इनकला हो जाएगा तो हम अपनी सेटलमेंट खुद लेंगे. और पाकिस्तान अगर इसमें पार्ट ऑफ सोल्यूशन पार्ट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम बनता है, फ्रीक बनता है, पार्टी बनता है, बिगड़ेगी. और पाकिस्तान अपना अमन इस स्टेज पे, आई डोंट थिंक सो दैट पाकिस्तान इज गोइंग टू sabotage its own peace at the cost of to meet the national interests of someone else. So तालिबान और अफगान गवर्नमेंट को एक दूसरे के साथ बैठना है, उन्हीं को पॉलिटिकल सोल्यूशन ही इसका हल है. देयर इज नो अदर सोल्यूशन. पाकिस्तान भी उसका हल नहीं कर सकता. तो व्हाट अफगानिस्तान नीड्स एन इंक्लूसिव एंड कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव पॉलिटिकल सोल्यूशन जो उसके स्टेबल प्रॉस्पेरियस अफगानिस्तान के लिए राह हमवार करे. और जहां तक अमेरिका का ताल्लुक है, अमेरिका भी इस खित्ते से जाने का इरादा नहीं करता, क्योंकि वो इट सीम्स कि वो चाइना और रशिया के खिलाफ अपनी इफेक्टिव प्रेजेंस इस खित्ते में रखना चाहता है, क्योंकि वो यहाँ से जंग भी हार के जा रहा है. and it has not achieved even one single objective while being there for 2 decades. सिवाय इसके कि उसने अपना एक रफली एक अंदाजे के मुताबिक $1 खरब के करीब उसने अपना गोला बारूद यहाँ पे जाया किया है। तो इस तनाजुर में, लेकिन अगेन इस तनाजुर में हम ये नहीं कह सकते कि पाकिस्तान और अमेरिका के ताल्लुकात में कोई ऐसी दूरी पैदा हो गई है या हमारी उनसे पक्की लड़ाई हो गई है। तो क्योंकि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस में तो आपके पास ना पॉइंट ऑफ नो रिटर्न होता है और आपके पास हमेशा ऑप्शन होती है और आप आइसोलेशन में रह भी नहीं सकते। तो अगेन आई वुड से पाकिस्तान अफगान पीस प्रोसेस में एक मेजर पॉजिटिव कंट्रीब्यूटर के तौर पे अपना रोल प्ले करेगा और इसको जारी भी रखेगा। और जहां तक अमेरिका की बात है तो अमेरिका आई वुड से कि उसने हमेशा अपने मफादात के लिए काम किया है और हर मुल्क के मफादात अपने होते हैं, पहले आपके डोमेस्टिक, रीजनल, नेशनल और फिर ग्लोबल होते हैं। और किसी भी मुल्क पे मैं नहीं समझती कि ये फर्ज है कि वो दूसरे मुल्क के मफादात हासिल करने के लिए अपने नेशनल और इंटरेस्ट को कुर्बान कर दे। और अगर कोई मुल्क ये समझता है उसे पॉलिसी को रिवाइज करने की जरूरत है कि ऐसा मुमकिन नहीं। तो अमेरिका ने कभी भी जो 20 साल में जो अफगानिस्तान में कुछ नहीं कर सके, अब बाहर बैठ के अगर वो समझता है कि वो अड्डे इस्तेमाल करके भी इसमें यहाँ पे कोई अपना कोई पीस टाइप सिचुएशन कर सकता है, तो मेरा ख्याल है कि ये उसकी खामख्याली है। लेकिन चूंकि उसने इस खित्ते में रहना है और हमें भी इस खित्ते में रहना है, क्योंकि नेबर्स ने तो कहीं नहीं जाना, तो हमारे मफादात भी इस खित्ते के साथ हैं जहां पे हम रह रहे हैं। पाकिस्तान भी अमन चाहता है और स्पेसिफिकली ताकि आपके हमसायों के साथ हम कोई ऐसी गलत फहमी पैदा ना कर दें। लेकिन दूसरी तरफ वी शुड नॉट ओवरलुक द वेरी फैक्ट कि दूसरी तरफ अमेरिका है जो सुपर पावर है, उसकी दुनिया में एक न्यू सेंस है, IMF है, FATF है, FATF है, जहाँ वो पाकिस्तान के लिए मुश्किलात पैदा कर सकते हैं। लेवल पे बड़े फैसले हेड ऑफ द स्टेट अपना मफाद और नुकसान दोनों को सामने रख के देखते हैं कि आपका ज्यादा फायदा किस चीज में है या नुकसान ज्यादा किस में है, या फिर दोनों चीजों में से हम कौन सी ऐसी चीज ऑप्ट कर लें कि हम सरवाइव कर सकते हैं। तो आई वुड से कि हमारी सर्वाइवल तो इसी खित्ते के साथ है और हम यहाँ पे कोई भी ऐसा काम नहीं कर सकते जिसमें रीजन में हमारे अपने हमसाया ममालिक के साथ ताल्लुकात खराब हो जाएं। और अगर कोई मुश्किलात माली या सियासी एतबार से आ सकती है तो मेरा ख्याल है उसमें पहले भी कोई अमेरिका से कोई इतनी ज्यादा हमें उम्मीद नहीं रखनी चाहिए। बट आई वुड से कि अगर सिक्योरिटी के मफादात हमारे इस रीजन में डिस्टर्ब हो गए तो फिर हमारे अपने नेबर्स के साथ भी हालात ताल्लुकात जो हैं गड़बड़ हो सकते हैं। तो उससे पाकिस्तान के लिए बहुत ज्यादा मसाइल पैदा हो सकते हैं। तो ये चीजें देखने की जरूरत है। और उसके अलावा एक इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज जो मैं कॉन्फ्रेंस के हवाले से अशरफ गनी साहब के हवाले से, तो इस सारे पीस प्रोसेस में आई वुड से कि अशरफ गनी साहब का खुद किरदार वो उस पे सवालिया निशान है, क्योंकि उनका वो पीस प्रोसेस में अगर वो अमेरिका की बात नहीं मान रहे, तो बहुत सारी डिस्कशंस भी मैंने सुनी और रिसर्च आर्टिकल्स भी पढ़े कि जिसमें ये है कि अशरफ गनी साहब हैं कौन। पहले तो ये देख लेना कि वो वही हैं जो अमेरिका में पढ़ाते भी रहे, उनकी नेशनैलिटी भी है, फौज का सारा खर्चा अमेरिका में उठाया हुआ है। तो फिर अशरफ गनी साहब अमेरिका की बात क्यों नहीं मान रहे? क्योंकि तालिबान, एक तरफ तालिबान है जो कामयाब हो रहे हैं, दूसरी तरफ बात यह है कि वो अशरफ गनी के साथ बैठ के बात करने के लिए तैयार नहीं है। तो शायद अशरफ गनी साहब को साइड पे करें तो शायद कोई इंटरम टाइप अरेंजमेंट हो जाए, लेकिन उसके भी कोई बहुत ज्यादा इम्कानात अभी फिल वक्त नजर नहीं आ रहे। लेकिन ये बात जो इसका हल तो आई वुड से कि ये निगोशिएटेड इंटरेस्ट पैकेज पे ही बात होगी कि हु गेट्स व्हाट ऑन इक्वल ग्राउंड। So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so
for
much,
being
Dr.
me.
GORAYA. Thank you very much. As you said, like Pakistan will continue to play a positive, constructive role in the peace process in Afghanistan. I think you have raised two very important points, or maybe I could call them important questions. Maybe IMTIAZ Sahab can shed further light on those two important questions. One point that Dr. GORAYA talked about was that Afghan society has changed over the past 20 years, especially women's rights and all that scenario in which the situation that was before that, in which Taliban held sway, and could manage things, would that affect any future dispensation in Afghanistan involving the Taliban, whether through a negotiated settlement or otherwise, the change in the society of Afghanistan? And I think the other important factor that Dr. Goraya alluded to, and I think once again it raises another question, whether there is still appetite in the US or NATO to re-engage militarily in Afghanistan. With those two additional questions to you, Gul Saab, I would now request you to please make your remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, salam to everybody. First, I must apologize for a technical Wi-Fi glitch that was beyond my control. So somebody torpedoed my intervention in the beginning. So I apologize for that. And secondly, Dr. NAHEED GORAYA has left me speechless. I wish I had a crystal ball, to look beyond what she has already said. It has created a difficult situation for me now what to say. But thank you, Arish, for
Thank you, sir.
two questions. But before we go to the two questions, let me say that Afghanistan, has been a story of war, agreements, divergences, internal as well as external, geopolitics, and internal Afghan contradictions. And that has turned it into a potpourri, a cocktail of problems that are also resonating and affecting the entire regional neighborhood. So first we have to, I think, go back a little bit to how the United States got here. I was reading an interview by Zalmay Khalilzad with Voice of America he did last night. And he says that one thing is clear: the government in Kabul is unable to defeat the Taliban. The Taliban will most likely not be able to conquer entire Afghanistan. This was the reason that motivated former President Donald Trump to send Zalmay Khalilzad for negotiations with the Taliban, which then culminated in the 29th February 2020 Doha deal. So the premise of that deal was that the stakeholders cannot defeat one another, and let's create a situation for them in which they can sit across the table and sort out their differences. But as we have seen, this has not been possible for a multiple range of factors. The first factor, obviously, is President Ashraf Ghani's position on Taliban. He still considers them as the proxies, as the agents of Pakistan, and that is a view that is supported by India. And this was a view that the United States also bought for considerable time, but I think not anymore, particularly after the Russians and the Chinese threw their weight behind the Taliban. So right now what we see is a very clear delineation of interests. On the one hand, we see Pakistan, China, Iran, Turkey, Russia, and on the other, you see India, Afghanistan, and partially the United States. So this brings me to the question that Arish raised, whether there is a military, or whether, I think Dr. NAHEED basically left this question, whether there's enough appetite within the NATO alliance for yet another military intervention. I think there's zero chance for military intervention by NATO once again in the United States, after the United States alone claims to have spent more than $2.6 trillion in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. I think the United States has enough internal problems, as well as a disinclination, a total rejection of another intervention in Afghanistan militarily. So, and in Europe, in particular, the major European countries totally disagree with the military approach. They may be still inclined to support the NATO mission in somehow, but I don't think any European country, including Germany, UK, and France, are ready to recommit themselves to another round of war in Afghanistan. As for the question of what the society has changed in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, of course. Afghanistan has considerably changed in the last 2 decades with a big number of women going back to schools, into jobs, with a lot of universities that have come up. I think dozens of universities, not to speak of schools. So we have seen a gradual incremental change in the socio-political fabric of Afghanistan in the last 20 years. It has also generated stakes for all sections of the society. One big stake is the parliament itself, which is full of neo-rich people. At least 40% of the Afghan MPs, I think, come from very wealthy families. I personally think the way I looked at it when we visited Kabul in February, I think, that the parliament perhaps can serve as a big cushion, as a big buffer between the combatants. Because these people, mostly businessmen, they realize the importance of the continuation of economic activity. They would not like a disruption of their businesses. And I personally think, I may be too hopeful, that the Afghan parliament, the Ulasi Jaga, can perhaps serve as a big dam against a civil war, against total disruption, particularly of businesses. Now, having said that, what President Ashraf Ghani has been doing, he has been oscillating, wobbling, and there are a couple of examples for that. In his address yesterday to the parliament, he said that he basically blamed the United States' hasty pullout from Afghanistan for the Taliban military advances. And he said that, I've been telling Americans to be careful. But if you contrast this with what he said in Khost on the 11th of July, that's quite a contrast. I can actually read from how that address to a gathering was reported. He said, we caused the withdrawal of Americans from Afghanistan with dignity. And that he wrote a letter to former US President Donald Trump asking him to leave Afghanistan. Then didn't I say 7 years ago that they will leave? Didn't I send a letter to President Trump 2 years ago to leave? He asked. And then again, he came to his favorite theme, Pakistan, indirectly, obviously. He said, if you love Afghanistan, promise me you have not accepted the Durand Line and not to change Afghanistan from a roundabout to a one-way road. Promise me you will not sell Afghanistan's waters to others. Promise me you will not serve others. So this was his address to a gathering in Khost on 11th of July. So you can see the contradictions that the Afghan president has been oscillating in. And that is a dilemma for the entire peace process, that if you have a president who is driven more by a sense of insecurity, who is driven more by assurances given from India, then it makes it a very complicating factor, because most of other Afghan leaders, including Dr. Abdullah, Hani Fatma, the foreign minister, they are very much amenable to finding a middle ground. But what we see right now, and that's why the Doha process has been stalled, that President Ghani wants everything happening under his authority. He thinks even if there is an interim government, he will be the head of that interim government. And that is a complicating factor. Why? Because Taliban have clearly, categorically stated that any dispensation with Ashraf Ghani, first Vice President Amrullah Saleh, and National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib will not be acceptable. So here comes the unbreakable factor. This is a wall that we cannot currently bring down, regardless of what Pakistan does, regardless of what the United States do, or Russia, or China. And the major complicating factor, I would say the second major complicating factor, is India. Now imagine the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar on July the 28th at New Delhi, standing next to the US Foreign Secretary Antony Blinken, calls Afghanistan as immediate neighbor. I mean, what a joke is this? You know, if we were to draw a straight line between New Delhi and Kabul, it's 1,074 kilometers. If you were to draw a line from Wagah border to Torkham, it's nearly 600 kilometers. And Indian leaders have this audacity to call Afghanistan as immediate neighbor. And this is a transcript, official transcript that was given out by Foreign Secretary Antony Blinken's office, in which Jaishankar was quoted. And then he also says, our duty is to protect Afghanistan from the malign influence of neighbors. So my question is, which malign influence and by whom? The malign influence in Pakistan of India, for instance, all the proxy terrorists who have been killing our people, our soldiers, our FC, our policemen, or Pakistan's malign influence in Afghanistan, which helped facilitate the US Taliban talks, which led to the February 29 Doha deal, which led to the initiation of the intra-Afghan dialogue. And the entire process was sanctified by the UN Security Council through a resolution. So here is a very important question for everybody. What malign influences are we talking about? Is Russia a malign influence in Afghanistan? Is China a malign influence in Afghanistan? Or a country that is 1,000 kilometers away and still calls Afghanistan its neighbor? So this geopolitical factor, I think, is an extremely inhibiting factor for the entire peace process. This also creates problems for Pakistan, all despite admission by the American leaders, including Zalmay Khalilzad. In his interview with Voice of America, he said, we agree with Pakistani leaders that what happens in Afghanistan, that continuing war there will have negative implications for Pakistan. It means more violence, more refugees, but more importantly, it means lost economic opportunities, lost opportunity for connectivity within the region. And this is what Zalmay Khalilzad is saying. That's why I think in the end, I would say that Pakistan too is pushing for a negotiated settlement, because this will include then everybody, hopefully. And that means you can try to stabilize Afghanistan by including all Afghan stakeholders instead of one minority trying to dictate and hang on to power. This is what it seems at the moment. And Zalmay Khalilzad also said that, Pakistani leaders do tell me that's exactly right, when Pakistan is also pushing for a negotiated settlement, because that's in the interest not only of Pakistan, Afghanistan, but the entire region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, IMTIAZ Sahab. Some really sobering remarks about Afghanistan. If I understood you correctly in the beginning, IMTIAZ Sahab, you mentioned, you quoted Zalmay Khalilzad as saying that even though Afghanistan Afghan security forces do not have the capability to defeat the Taliban do not have the capability to overrun Kabul, something to that effect. And there is also a question regarding that in the chat panel by President IRS, that do we anticipate a long drawn conflict in Afghanistan, a civil war like situation, if the US is unwilling to commit with boots on ground, or NATO is unwilling to commit with boots on ground? How is this situation going to evolve in Afghanistan?
Yeah, this situation is not rosy at the moment. I think you also mentioned in your introduction, the Helmand province is right now the battlefield. I think the capital, Lashkargah, has almost fallen to the Taliban, where they have taken control of the local radio and television. Herat is partially embattled, and you can see the importance of Herat. It connects with Iran. And southern Kandahar is also in control of the Taliban, in addition to 5 other border points, districts that are currently under the Taliban control. So as a whole, if the Kabul government doesn't relent, I don't see Taliban giving up. The hasty American withdrawal, the way American president projected the situation in Afghanistan, he said there is no terrorist group in Afghanistan, and then we will fight terrorists where they are. This was his July 8th speech. So going by that, I think Taliban, because they have been sanctified, they have been legitimized through these deals, so they think it's their right. And if the Afghan government doesn't relent, then I think we're going to see quite a lot of bloodshed. And that's not going to be conducive at all for Pakistan. One thing that has happened that is basically buried the Durand Line issue is the fence that Pakistan has constructed. Pakistan basically, it's like a nail in the so-called old theory of strategic depth. So Pakistan itself has nailed the coffin of Durand Line on its territory. But any Afghan that doesn't want to become part of the mainstream and doesn't want to become the part of the peace process, they would still keep stoking fears, keep flogging this dead horse that is called Durand Line. But I think this is something that has happened, I think, in the long-term interest of Afghanistan. And what Pakistan needs to do right now is basically to, I think, go into an information offensive saying that this is Pakistan's internationally recognized border, in order to blunt the Afghan nationalist narrative of Durand Line.
Yes, before I go to Imran, who has raised his hand, there was another important point raised by President IRS in his comments in the chat box. There has been this talk about we are having a changed Taliban. So do you really think that we have a changed Taliban with a changed outlook?
Yeah, I think what we need to remember, number one, Afghanistan remains a tribal society. As much as most parts of Pakistan are, we are run by a tribal mindset. Taliban, because they are conservative, coming from southern Afghanistan, and then religious, it's a deadly combination. So expecting a sea change in the Taliban behavior, in the Taliban worldview in 20 years is difficult. So the first point we must keep in mind when we are trying to look at the behavior of the Afghan leaders and a lot of Pakistani leaders is that the societies are primarily tribal. So the mindsets are tribal. We look at things from the eyes of a tribal leader. And this is what determines lives in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan. Now, secondly, we should not assume the Taliban as pre-programmed zombies. It's not a Pegasus program, you know. So they are very much human beings. They've been enjoying the comforts of five-star hospitality in Doha, as well as elsewhere, wherever they go in Beijing or Moscow or Tehran, they are accorded five-star hospitality. And I think this has moderated their worldview. That's why I think Siraj Haqqani, the deputy chief of Taliban, had already said in his op-ed for the New York Times that, you know, nobody should be afraid of us coming back to power. I think Hibatullah Akhund, the Taliban chief, also in his Eid message late last month, also said more or less similar thing, that we will accord all sorts of rights to women, to also they will respect human rights. This is what the message was. So I think we should not assume them as zombies. They know what they must do. And secondly, what a lot of people are forgetting and ignoring is back in 90s, Taliban were on their own. It was only Pakistan and Saudi Arabia that had recognized them. Right now, the UN Security Council has legitimized and endorsed their deal with the United States. Right now, Russia, China, Turkey, and Iran are also supporting the Taliban because they consider Taliban as the bulwark against proxy terrorists. So they will not annoy any of their regional supporters because they are very much cognizant of the fact that if they end up annoying even their regional supporters, where would they go? Would they push Afghanistan back into a country of 1990s where there were fiefdoms, where there was no school open, hardly any school open, no electricity, no water? Compare Afghanistan today to that, it has progressed, it has moved forward, and it's the responsibility of the international community to preserve those changes, to protect that development that has happened so far and to build on it. And the only way to do that is to stay engaged with all Afghan stakeholders.
Imran, you can please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Arish. I have not a question, but a comment. And my apologies if it get a bit long. And I would request the panelists to please respond to that comment. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
From existing literature, one can easily infer an impending political and security crisis in Afghanistan. And I believe an opportunity is embedded in the challenge itself. For me, the fragile political and security infrastructure provides ample opportunities for Pakistan to invest in those areas, along with other areas where India has been investing for decades. I know Pakistan is doing so, but doing purposely to escape from the scapegoat situation is not going to benefit Pakistan, keeping in mind Pakistan's long-term
Imran, we have lost you. We have lost you there.
Malign influence.
Malign Influence once again. So since Imran is having troubles connecting, I would go ahead and ask a question, Imtiaz Gul Sahab, that.
We have so many questions also
Oh,
on
okay,
the chat.
okay, yeah. So some of these questions have already
am I
been
audible?
responded. Imran, I
Okay.
would recommend that you type your question in the chat box, and that would be more convenient.
That saves us time.
Okay,
actually.
okay. I do. Okay.
Is there any chance of restart or of war by the US and Afghanistan? I think we've already addressed this question. Is Pakistan pursuing a strategy of non-intervention in Afghan Taliban conflict spurred by US withdrawal? I think we've also addressed this question already in your comments. Then there is Mariam's question. Do you see emergence of strong voice for pan-Pashtunism in independent, war-free Afghanistan? Afghanistan is independent already, but war-free for sure.
So is a question directed to
you, sir?
I think that this boogie of a Pashtunistan is almost dead. We have seen what has happened to the proponents of Pashtun nationalism in Pakistan. They drew their inspiration from Pashtun nationalists in Afghanistan. But I think a lot of time has passed. We have fenced the border. We must call it a border, not Durand line. And with the passage of time, I think the nationalist movements, they get diluted as they become part of the mainstream. At time once we had National Awami Party. Now, all Pashtun nationalists were part of that. Now there are 3 or 4 factions of ANP, and one is called Pakhtunkhwa Milli Awami Party in Balochistan. So it's 1-man, 2-man parties. So this is what happens when the states start addressing the grievances of affected communities. With the passage of time, I think more and more people join the mainstream, and these voices then get marginalized. The same has happened in Afghanistan. A lot of people, the proponents of Durand Line, those who believe that entire Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province is lower Afghanistan, is occupied Afghanistan. I've seen books in Germany when I was there, which basically described this part, the areas up to the Indus River, as the lower occupied Afghanistan. But somehow those people who tend to live in the past, they may still be raising their voices, raising the issue, but I don't see much future for this kind of parochial sloganeering, because Afghanistan right now has other issues. The demography has also changed. Most of the Pashtun nationalists, they are sitting abroad. They are not in Afghanistan anymore. So I don't see any big chance of revival of pro-Pashtunistan movement.
Okay, so there is another question about how the people of Afghanistan feel about Taliban's demand of establishing an emirate, and also what policy should Pakistan follow to control refugee influx in case of civil chaos. This is a question asked by my colleague Humaira Iqbal, and I think, as I also in the beginning referred to the NSA statement in the US of establishing no conflict zones within Afghanistan for Afghan refugees. So would that fly, and how are we foreseeing to deal with this problem?
I mean, the influx of refugees would obviously be a big issue. It will not be easy to stem the flow of particularly those refugees who have relatives here, because we will not be able to stop issuing visas. Somehow, I think people-to-people contacts will most probably remain intact. And there is always the possibility of people staying on, asking for a refugee status once they cross the border. So it will bring with it more complications. It will be an additional economic burden. Although I believe that all those people who are here, they are not economic burden anymore. Most of them are somehow already integrated into the economy. But the issue of Emirates, Afghanistan is an independent country. If the Afghan stakeholders agree on the title of their country, on the characterization, how it is called, then Pakistan has no business with that. The only business Pakistan will have is to manage that relationship without hurting its long-term interests. We have been hurting our long-term interests through our short-sighted policies on a number of occasions. So smart diplomacy will be needed. Vision, far-sightedness will be needed. I can quote you an example. A former Canadian Ambassador Chris Alexander wrote a very nasty article in Globe and Mail yesterday. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here responded to that. This is not smart diplomacy. The article was full of venom against Pakistan, against the Prime Minister. But the guy only has like 40,000 followers on Twitter. And it's not really worth a response from the government itself. But look at our bureaucracy. Somebody or some people in their own wisdom, they deemed it fit to respond to Chris Alexander, thereby elevating his status to a bona fide commentator on Afghanistan. So we need smart diplomacy. We don't need any limitations to put on how the Afghans should call themselves. We really have to be neutral in that sense, but we cannot be neutral to what is happening in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Gul Saab. As more questions are pouring in, I would also request Dr. NAHEED GORAYA if she would want to comment on any of the questions or the discussion that has taken place so far.
I would just like to add a comment, but I'm just trying to learn from Sir Gul Saab. So it is my first experience, so I wanted to hear him. That's why I was quiet. So I just want to add that when we talk about the peace process, because it's considered as a spectrum from ranging from insecure to secure, and fundamentally we have been talking, all of us, we have been talking that Pakistan will always be a partner of, but a partner, we should think that partner of socio-economic development. We should need to tackle the cross-border other problems also related to the environment, related to the climate change, and of course public health system because of this COVID-19 issue. So great powers, I would just like to add, they should also focus on the economic development for the welfare of their people in order to have the lasting impact on their vote bank. And I always borrow the saying of Swedish Prime Minister, who says that every decision we take in our daily life, it makes a difference. It counts. Everyone's behavior and everyone's negligence, it matters. So we should keep in mind. So this is all. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. GORAYA. I think Imran has posted a long comment in the chat box. I would try to summarize it, that he's saying that the Taliban, after coming into power in Afghanistan, would want to have good relations with all the countries of the world. So in that scenario, Pakistan should move from being a facilitator, from being just a facilitator, to being a good neighbor of Afghanistan in that scenario, so that it has more leverage on the government in Afghanistan, Taliban government in Afghanistan. And then there is another question from Zunaira, who is my colleague at IRS. If the Afghan peace process continues to be stalled or altogether fail, could this further instability or Taliban gains in Afghanistan embolden militant extremist elements within Pakistan? This is an important point that IMTIAZ Gul Saab, I would like to have your comment on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll first respond to the latter one. I know, meanwhile, we should be very clear. There is no militant radical Islamist threat to Pakistan. There's only proxy terrorist threat to Pakistan. They are externally driven, funded, I will not name countries, but Pakistan's problem is proxy terrorism. And yes, those proxy terrorists will likely find places in ungoverned areas of Afghanistan and also partially in ungoverned areas of Pakistan wherever possible. Proxy terrorists, they take cover of mainstream political parties, religious political parties. They take shelter in mosques, in religious seminaries, whether in Waziristan or Dera Ismail Khan or Multan or elsewhere. And the same is true for Afghanistan. So what Pakistan needs is to further reinforce its vigilance, its surveillance of areas suspected of sheltering terrorists. They all use this religious ideology to basically justify their existence. But I think what we have seen in the last 15 years or so is that the real threat was proxy terrorists. Proxy terrorists that were born out of a Teach Pakistan India policy. Teach Pakistan a lesson, India policy that was born in 2009. So whatever we have seen after, particularly after the emergence of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan in December 2007, and then it grew to strength in the ensuing years, this was proxy terrorism. And anybody who believed that it is religiously driven, ideological people who may end up creating an Islamic Emirates in Pakistan based on this Sharia, I think they were being very naive. There was no such threat. They do not have the capacity to take over a nuclear armed country with more than 500,000 troops, with such a massive infrastructure, and a country which has never voted for radical parties. Partially, yes, but religious political parties only once got 11% votes. That was 2002 election. Thereafter, they have mostly been decimated. So we don't see that threat here in Pakistan. The threat will be proxy. And we really have to up our guards further to face that challenge.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from an intern at IRS. Her name is Tayyiba Khurshid. She has asked about how can Pakistan ideally help Afghanistan in stabilizing the situation in Afghanistan, because stability in Afghanistan is essential for CPAC, BRI, etc. as well.
I think we cannot help Afghanistan as long as the Afghans themselves are not willing to help themselves. That will come only when the Afghans mutually, conveniently sit across the table and find a way how to govern the country, and then basically reach out to Pakistan and other countries for help. Until that happens, until Afghanistan remains a divided house, a polarized society, and extremely polarized political entity, it will be difficult for any country to help in stabilization and economic rehabilitation and development.
Thank you. Then there is another important question asked by another intern at IRS, Nabia Imran. Her question is about the likelihood of the US re-establishing military presence in Central Asian republics after withdrawal, just for air bases or anything. Do you see any chance?
I think we should remember that almost all Central Asian republics are part of a collective security organization that is led by the Russian Federation. And for allowing space to any other country, all these republics need a consensus vote from within the organization. And given the relationship between Russia and the United States, it's almost impossible. And Zamir Kabulov, the Russian envoy for Afghanistan, had made it very clear about 3 months ago that none of the STAN countries would probably be even thinking of providing any military bases to the United States, because that is against the fundamental principle of the collective security organization. And that's what has happened, and that's what has prevented also Pakistan's military and the civilian government from making any promises to the United States as far as the military bases are concerned. So I think it was a collective regional decision, since we are right now very close with China and with Russia, and together with them, we basically took a very conscious decision not to allow any military operation base for counterterrorism operations. And I think this is maybe also the success of Pakistan, that it has tried to synergize its positions, its policies with other important regional factors. I can quote you an anecdote. I wrote an article on the same subject 3 months ago. I submitted that on the 28th of April to the Australian National University, which is a very prestigious organization, and they print East Asia Forum Journal, like research papers. So I wrote then that it's an irony that after investing $2.6 trillion, losing 2,480 soldiers, the United States is isolated in the region. It will not get military bases in Stan countries. And I just quoted these things that I've just told you. That paper was never published. Somehow these guys sitting in Australia, because they're so given to the United States, they did not believe what I was saying. And I had to publish that paper here.
I think I would, using my privilege of being the moderator of the discussion, I would ask the last two questions of this session. You mentioned that the Afghan parliament could serve as a buffer between the combatants in Afghanistan, but that parliament is not recognized by the Taliban. So how do you see that playing any role for peacemaking in Afghanistan between the combatants? That is question number one. Question number two is about, we've had some comments about the irresponsible statements coming out of people in leadership positions, responsible leadership positions in Afghanistan. You also referred to the statement of President Ashraf Ghani in Host. And then we have seen statements from the National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib regarding Pakistan. So if Pashtunistan is a dead issue, and if it's a settled thing, so what purpose does it serve for the Afghan leaders in terms of Pakistan-Afghanistan relations as well as domestically? Why do they give out such statements?
Well, I think it is trying to please their constituency, whatever little constituency these leaders have. They need to have an issue to hang on to in order to remain relevant in the political discourse. Because as I explained earlier, that President Ghani, within a space of 1 month, gave 2 different contradictory statements on the US troop withdrawal. So, when people call them out on these contradictions, so the only near enemy they have available is Pakistan. So they can characterize Pakistan the way they want, although they also intrinsically know that there is no escape from Pakistan, geographically as well as politically, because the same people will probably be coming here for getting the US visa or the Canadian visa. So this is very unfortunate when people in position start foul-mouthing their neighbor. Their neighbor may have been responsible partially, but most of the blame we can dump at the United States as well as the Afghan leaders themselves. If they keep squabbling, if they don't find a middle ground, then it will be very difficult for outsiders to bring them together. As for the parliament, yes, they don't recognize, but don't forget, they also never recognize the Ghani government that the Taliban have been talking to, the delegation appointed by President Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah. Taliban never allowed women into a conference hall, into a meeting room. But for the past 1 year, they have been talking with women under one roof. A number of Afghan, very bright, intelligent young ladies peacemakers. So Taliban have been sitting across the table. So in conflicts, parties do take maximalist positions to use them as bargaining chips, as a leverage for eventual negotiations.
Thank you so much. As Dr. NAHEED GORAYA also pointed out, we have been thoroughly educated. Thank you so much for taking time out for us. And talking
Can
to us.
may
Sir,
I ask
Sure.
yeah, short question from
Allah
Sir
khair
Gul
kare.
Sahab, because it's an
Allah khair
honor to
kare.
learn from them. नहीं सर, एक बहुत यानी कि apart from this discussion, मुझे वैसे as a student ये बता दें कि इसका हल होगा क्या अफगानिस्तान का कभी जिंदगी में, बस ये मुख्तर सर.
काश कि मैं बता सकता आपको, वो मैजिक बॉल नहीं है मेरे पास. पहले अफगानों को इकट्ठे बैठ के अपना मसला हल तलाश करना होगा. ठीक है.
Another question has popped up in the chat box as well about the role of China, Russia, and Iran in the future of peace process in Afghanistan and relationship with the Taliban and the Ghani government.
I think I explained that. Right now, all these countries are very much interested in preventing Afghanistan from descending into another round of chaos, another chaotic phase of civil war, because they are also cognizant of the negative influence that flows out of Afghanistan in case there is continued instability. So they're all trying. I mean, we saw China hosted the Taliban delegation on July the 27th, just very recently. And I think Taliban were very happy, very satisfied with China's role. And China, on their part, the Wang Yi, the foreign minister, reassured them that China doesn't want any interference in Afghanistan's internal affairs, but it will stand by the Afghans in their search for peace and conflict resolution. So is Russia. Very positive statements have been coming out. So I think they're all trying to persuade, on the one hand, the Taliban to stay engaged with the government. They're also exerting some sort of influence on the government to just be a little flexible. And the Taliban, as I said earlier, they will not allow themselves to be antagonistic with any of these countries, because they've been their supporters. So how can they basically antagonize the regional countries? Because it has ended the isolation of the Taliban as it was in the 90s. So the Taliban would not really want to become isolated once again by annoying China, Russia, Turkey, or Iran.
As I can see, President IRS, Ambassador NAHEED has turned on his camera, so I assume he wants to
have the last word.
No, thank you, Arish. I don't want to have the last word, but it was really a pleasure listening to you. It was really a pleasure listening to the panelists, because I think Afghanistan is a very complicated situation. And just like IMTIAZ Gul Sahab just said, that we really don't have any answers, actually. We can take calculated guesses, but anyway, at the end of the day, it is for the Afghans to decide what they want. And I think that is the most important thing. And we can all hope and pray for peace in Afghanistan, peace in the region, because I think this is imperative. We need to have a stable region for economic prosperity to take place, because apart from Afghanistan, there are other challenges also in the region. And then we are also now facing the challenges of climate change. And also, I think it is imperative that stability should return to South Asia. I don't know how that's going to happen. I really don't know what are the answers in Afghanistan, and but it was really a pleasure listening to the two speakers. Thank you very much for your invaluable contribution. And honestly, I don't want to have the last word. Over to you, Arish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Saab, for your comments. I think that there are a few key takeaways for me from this session. One is that Pakistan has been playing a constructive role in the peace process of Afghanistan, and Pakistan will continue to do so no matter what. And the US is pretty much done with Afghanistan, militarily at least. And anyone who is thinking that the US is still here, I think militarily, I think they're mistaken. One important point that I think IMTIAZ Gul Saab raised here, and I think many of us are confused about it, and I think he has really clarified it, that Pakistan is a victim of proxy terrorism and not of extremist militancy. I think that is a nuance that all Pakistanis need to keep in mind. And thank you so much, Gul Saab, for clarifying it for us. Thank you for all your valuable comments. We're honestly very, very thoroughly educated. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for taking time out for IRS. It means that we'll be bothering you in future as well.
I feel very flattered,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goraya.
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Thank you,
Okay.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank